So far, we have talked about the problem of evil, including the inconsistent triad, the evidential problem of evil, and the nature of evil. The WJEC may ask you questions regarding the particular problems caused by animal, innocent, and immense suffering. These problems we will need to return to when we have looked at some solutions to the problem of evil to see if the solutions have solved these specific difficulties. The first difficulty mentioned on the specification is animal suffering. Richard Dawkins points out that this is part of the created order. Nature is red or in tooth and claw, according to Tennyson. Natural selection requires nature to be brutal. Survival of the fittest means that the weak suffer and die so that the strong may survive and pass on their genes. A creator God has made this world with the qualities that mean these events happen. Since he is an omniscient creator, he knew when he created what he was doing and what suffering his creation would experience. And being powerful, he could have created the world differently. Much of animal suffering is also caused by free will beings, humanity. We were created by God and given stewardship of his creation. Being all-knowing, he knew what this would lead to and still did it anyway. Suffering here is unjust, since the ones causing the suffering do not experience the pain. The animals themselves do not have free will and so have done nothing to deserve such an experience. They are at our mercy. Such suffering seems unnecessary. Nothing is gained by it for humanity or for the animals in question. There is no long-term benefit to any species suffering in this way, and yet this state of affairs was supposedly created by an all-loving, all-knowing God. William Rowe highlights this difficulty very specifically in his analogy of the fawn. In this analogy, he points out that such an event, if no human is aware and cannot do anything to prevent the event or help once it has occurred, has no possible reason or benefit. It surely lowers the likelihood of an all-powerful, all-loving God existing if such events happen for no conceivable reason. Innocent suffering is an additional problem. It is clear that those beings who suffer, whether human or animal, many of them can be seen as morally blameless. This is an issue because God is supposed to be just, fair, and non-partisan. It seems that God is in fact either arbitrary or partisan if he causes suffering to those who have done nothing to deserve it, since a just God would ensure that suffering or evil was dished out only in proportion to the crimes committed. To add to this is the point that there seems to be an unfair distribution of suffering. Some seem to suffer an unfair proportion of suffering in relation to their circumstances. Suitable examples of such innocent suffering include the suffering of children and animals who cannot be said to be morally responsible for actions, and yet who are at the mercy of other moral agents or of nature. Another example might be the suffering of civilians in a war situation. A good example of the suffering of innocence is the biblical example of Job from the Old Testament. Job's sufferings are increasingly heaped upon him as the story progresses. Job does not suffer because he has done something wrong, despite what his friends try and claim. He is rejected by his friends and family, experienced of every kind of loss that is possible for a person to experience, and yet he remains faithful to God and innocent. Here at the end, God does reward him for his faithfulness by restoring his fortunes twofold. However, we still can question the goodness of a God who would put his creation through such an experience or test his creation to this extent. The final category that you will need to discuss is that of immense suffering. Besides the suffering of animals and innocent beings, we must consider the gravity of suffering and for how much a person must experience. Surely it would be possible for a person to experience lesser sufferings than they do. Why must it be so much? In addition, it is wide-ranging. So many people must have this experience. It's not just a few for the benefit of many, but many for the benefit of a few. Examples like those displaced by the activity of ISIS or the results of genocide during World War II. Death itself is something that all humans must experience, and sickness such as cancer, which is so far-reaching, means that we cannot claim that God allows suffering as a tool for some greater good, because surely if good is to be achieved by such suffering, it cannot be brought about as proportionally greater than the gravity of suffering that we see experienced. No amount of good in the world that we see outweighs this evil. Leibniz attempts to address this difficulty by pointing out that an all-loving, all-powerful God could create any world he likes. He created evil in order to give us the opportunity to respond to people in need. He gave us the amazing opportunity to demonstrate second-order goods that could never be demonstrated in a perfect world. If people didn't suffer, we couldn't show charity, compassion and agape towards people. If there were no challenges, how could we show courage and dignity? Such suffering allows us to respond in ways that make us show the greatness that humanity is capable of.